Good evening. I think I might have shared this story with you before, but it's a good story. It's called You're Not Home Yet. An old missionary couple had been working in Africa for years and they were returning to New York City to retire. They had no pension, their health was broken. They were defeated, discouraged and afraid. They discovered they were booked on the same ship as President Teddy Roosevelt, who was returning from one of his big game hunting expeditions. No one paid much attention to them. They watched the fanfare that accompanied the president's entourage, with passengers trying to catch a glimpse of the great man. As the ship moved across the ocean, the old missionary said to his wife, "Something's wrong. Why should we have given our lives in faithful service for God in Africa all these many years and have no one care a thing about us? Here this man comes back from a hunting trip and everybody makes much over him. Nobody gives two hoots about us." "Dear, you shouldn't feel that way," his wife said. "I can't help it. It doesn't seem right." When the ship docked in New York, a band was waiting to greet the president. The mayor and other dignitaries were there. The papers were full of the president's arrival. No one noticed this missionary couple. They slipped off the ship, found a cheap flat on the east side, hoping the next day to see what they could do to make a living in the city. That night the man's spirit broke. He said to his wife, "I can't take this. God is not treating us fairly." His wife replied, "Why don't you go into the bedroom and tell that to the Lord?" A short time later, he came out from the bedroom, but now his face was completely different. His wife asked, "Dear, what happened?" "The Lord settled it with me," he said. "I told him how bitter I was that the president should receive this tremendous homecoming when no one met us when we returned home. And when I finished, it seemed as though the Lord put his hand on my shoulder and simply said, 'But you're not home yet.'" I was reminded of this story by Psalm 106 verse 13, talking about the Israelites being led out of Egypt and all God's faithful provision for them. It says, "They soon forgot what he had done and did not wait for his plan to unfold." Seems amazing to think they could forget the parting of the Red Sea, being saved from certain death at the hands of Egyptian soldiers, or being guided by an enormous pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of cloud by fire by night. But sure enough, it isn't long before they're complaining about nothing to eat, and then complaining about only bread to eat, and then complaining about needing more water. It's obviously something I needed reminded of too, because so many of my Bible readings recently have served as illustrations. In John 11, when Mary and Martha send for Jesus and Lazarus dies, they must have been so puzzled when he didn't come quickly, so confused when they learned later that he had said Lazarus' illness would not end in death, and so disappointed. Both Martha and Mary say to him, "If only you had been here." But the devotional book I was reading by Phil Moore commented, "Don't let your if onlys rob us of our faith in who Jesus is. He wants to teach us to trust that he is who he says he is." Our small group has been looking at Isaiah, and the Lord Jesus quotes Isaiah chapter 35 verse 5 and 6 to John's disciples when John sends them to talk to the Lord from prison. Matthew 11. They ask, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we look for someone else?" I can imagine John, puzzled and disappointed when his faithful teaching and baptizing landed him in prison. The Lord Jesus wants him to trust who he says he is when he says, "Go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me." And then, of course, the ultimate example of having to wait for God's plan to unfold would be from the Friday afternoon of the Lord Jesus' crucifixion to the Sunday morning of his resurrection. Imagine the disciples' agony over what had happened and how they deserted him. Their confusion over what it meant for their hopes for the future. We know the resurrection is coming when we read these passages, but for the disciples, the hours in between must have been long and hard. There are times in our lives that seem long and hard, when we don't understand why God isn't answering our prayers, or maybe more accurately, isn't answering our prayers the way we would expect him to, or at the speed that we want him to. There are times when the personal discomfort or pain seems too hard or going on for too long. We're reminded in Psalm 106 verse 13 that his plan will unfold. He will fulfill all his good promises. And in the meantime, the words of the Keith and Kirsten Getty song are lovely. Still, my soul, be still. Do not forsake the truth you learned in the beginning. Wait upon the Lord, and hope will rise, as stars appear when day is dimming. God, you are my God, and I will trust in you and not be shaken. Lord of peace, renew a steadfast spirit within me to rest in you alone. Good night. Sleep well.